Hello and welcome for China Solved. I'm Andrew Hubert, and this is the China Negotiator. So you're in a trade war, episode 36. So who won? Today is December 3rd, 2018. This was a manufactured crisis, and the first act is over. So who won? Well, unfortunately, everyone but you. Here's what we're talking about today. Who won? Divergence is the most likely outcome. Aim low. Let's look at each one in a little bit more detail. So who won? Well, Donald Trump won. He created a crisis and then he solved it in the nick of time, as only he could. And it was the biggest deal in history. The Chinese Communist Party wins because they get to stay exactly the way they are. And it's going to be 90 days until they even have to talk about changing, depending on when you start the clock, because I don't know if they've negotiated when they start the timer. And it's going to be that kind of negotiating that you're going to be hearing about for the rest of your life. How about you and me? Did we win? No, we did not. This trade war was expensive. It has permanently ratcheted up the risk level that we're dealing with. And it expedites and sort of accelerates certain competitive options that maybe we didn't want. So let's look at that. That gentle tearing sound you hear in the background is China and the US detaching their economies from one another. Collisions are a bad option, and we definitely have been on the lookout for the problems associated with the colliding of two empires. But divergence can be a problem too, and I think that's the one we're going to have to start putting into our analysis. China can simply move on without us in certain directions, and they've done this before. The Great Firewall is the prime example I'm thinking of. China just decided that it wasn't going to try to negotiate with the internet. It was just going to make its own internet, and that's what it did, and it did it successfully. We all said it couldn't, but it did. Google was another one where they decided instead of negotiating with Google, they were just going to allow Google to find its way out. eBay, in a very famous case, tried to come into China and go head-to-head with Alibaba and did not work out. And the result was WeChat, Baidu, and Alipay. And divergence is shaping up to be a pretty potent competitive strategy. China's going to be saying, for 1 week only, sign up for a new bridge or dam with Chicomco and get a free IP backbone and cloud platform from Huawei, which only works with Huawei phones in the new generation of G5 or G6. Technology underpins so many of the conflicts we're starting to talk about now, but what we will be talking about in 6 months, what we should have been talking about now. Things like artificial intelligence and quantum computing and electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles and all of these smart techs. China's going all in developing that, and then they've made that one of their national priorities. And in the United States, we are still debating whether science is real and talking about what our guts tell us. So I don't know how well this competition is going to go. So divergence as a competitive strategy, two separate competing platforms or two separate competing systems. It's something I'm looking at as a potential competitive strategy and a strategic risk. And I think you should be looking at that as well. And number 3, aim low. Don't let your expectations get too far ahead of you. U.S.-China relations are now entering what I call the excruciating zone. And there will be negotiations about negotiations and discussions about timetables. If you hear words like framework and position paper and procedural meeting, then just stop what you're doing, get up from the computer, turn off the tablet, and go to your happy place. Because it's going to be stultifyingly dull and depressing. There are so many problems and issues wound up together on the table right now that the politics of whoever's speaking to you at the time is going to determine what outcome or conclusions you hear about. China is going to slowly edge the U.S. out of certain emerging markets while fending off naval probing and congressional committees. And that's how politics is going to shape up for the next 5 years or so. Final word, that gentle tearing sound you hear in the background is China moving away from the US and the West as it builds technology systems and markets of its own. Watch as new countries start to adapt programs like Alipay and WeChat and Mobike, and to start to use the Asian infrastructure banks' aid programs and start to buy Chinese firewall technologies, because that will indicate who is lining up on Team China. So while American diplomats are talking about sea lanes and navigation routes and IP protection and counterfeiting, Chinese diplomats are going to be having that conversation, but they'll also be having a separate track of conversations about markets and infrastructure projects and loans and cloud services and internet services with the leaders of emerging markets. And those are the people who are going to be Team China. Thanks very much for China Solved. I'm Andrew Hubert. If you want to learn more about negotiating in China, I have 2 books that might be helpful for you: The Fragile Bridge, Managing Conflict in China, and 10 Common Chinese Negotiating Mistakes. I also have a course on Udemy, Negotiating Successfully in China, which is getting an overhaul for 2019. So it's a work in progress, but the information is very current. Thanks very much. I'll talk to you again soon.